following program is a production of the Fairfax Network, Fairfax County Public Schools, funded in part by the Virginia Satellite Educational Network.
Welcome to the MTA studio. My name is Della Kidd, and I'm very pleased to introduce you to children's author Mary Batten. On today's program, we'll find out why Mary Batten writes nonfiction books for kids. We'll explore ideas found in Mary's books and see real-life examples of alien species. And of course, we'll take your questions about the writing process. Some of the books highlighted today include Anthropologist, Scientist of the People, Hey Daddy, Animal Fathers and Their Babies, and our featured favorite, Aliens from Earth, When Animals and Plants Invade Other Ecosystems. Mary, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to talking about my books.
Well, good. Let's get started. We'll begin with an email. This is from Katie, and she writes, Dear Ms. Batten, how did you come up with the title for Aliens from Earth? I thought aliens came from outer space.
Katie, a lot of people think that aliens come from outer space, and that's why I called it Aliens from Earth, to turn it around in people's heads. You know, when a new animal or plant gets into a community where they've never lived before, they really are an alien. And you may have aliens in your backyard.
I'm sure we've never thought about it that way before, but what can kids as well as adults learn from the book?
I think they can learn that when a new plant or a new animal comes into a neighborhood, a community where they've never lived before, it can cause big trouble. For example, one of the communities in my book is the big island continent of Australia. Animals on islands have developed in isolation because the island is surrounded by water. That means nothing could get off the island, nothing could get onto the island. But when Europeans began sailing to other places to discover and explore, they not only brought their ships with them, but they also brought animals and plants that were familiar to them. When the Europeans came to Australia, one of the animals they brought with them was the cat, the plain old domestic cat. But in Australia, there were no cats. There had never been any cats. And so the cats became wild. As these cats had babies and those babies had babies, the population grew larger and larger. There was nothing to eat the cats, nothing to prey on the cats, but the cats became very fierce, and they started attacking some of Australia's unique wild animals, the marsupials, the same family that kangaroos belong to. And the cats actually ate some of these little marsupials into extinction. That's one of the things that can happen.
So there was a lot of destruction, and just like for here with the gypsy moth.
With the gypsy moth that was brought in from Europe to the United States, and it started eating native trees. There was no predator of gypsy moths here. Well, now gypsy moths have destroyed hundreds of thousands of acres of New England forest, cost billions of dollars in damage, and it's a huge problem.
You know, this is all, what you're discussing is an excellent example of how our choices, the cause and effect, and the ripple effect of down the road perhaps not thinking through what we're doing and how it affects our environment, as well as the financial issue as well.
And some of it was accidental. Some of the alien species that got in were purely by accident, not because someone really, and the people didn't understand a lot about ecology then, and they didn't understand how an ecosystem's balance could be upset.
A huge impact for us today.
Huge.
Getting the facts straight is important to writers. In this upcoming report, student Kevin Shanahan tells us of an alien fish and its potential impact to watery habitats. And when we return, more from science writer Mary Batten.
We're just assembling a story that sounds a bit fishy. It's rumored that a creature not native to Virginia waters can change its appearance, hop out of water, and walk across a field and eat dogs and cats. Can it be so? The MTA crew asked the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries to set things straight about the northern snakehead fish, and this is what we found out. This is John Odenkirk. He's a fish biologist. He's suiting up for safety because electrofishing is an efficient but dangerous way to collect information. He wants to know what kind of fish and how many fish are in nearby waters.
What this does is it puts a small charge in the water, enough to stun the fish, but not enough to hurt them.
As they say, don't try this on your own.
All right, after this guy, we'll go.
Woo! He made it! According to published reports, the northern snakehead fish comes from Asia. How it made its way to this Fairfax, Virginia creek is unknown. Maybe the fish were pets. No one really knows for sure.
The place, what they really like, they like this undercut bank, and then over there where the concrete bulkhead is, this holes, and they like the habitat. They really seem to, it's almost like they have the same sort of habitat desire as a bass does. They like hiding places. There he is. We got one. They're still here. They're walking across land and attacking small children and dogs. Basically, all that was hogwash. Piscivorous, meaning they eat other fish. Even an age 0 snakehead like this one that's only 2 or 3 months old, his whole diet is other fish. But what they can do is they can survive very low water quality because they're obligate air breathers. As long as it's kept a little moist, it can breathe air, just like we breathe air.
There are 27 different kinds of snakehead fish. In this area, the fish survive in low water quality, they eat other fish, and they spawn frequently. These are competitive advantages.
Last year we went from 20, this year we go to almost 400. Next year if we go to 5,000, and the year after that we go to 50,000, then maybe we'll start worrying. I just don't know what's going to happen. Those two could have been from the same actual spawn. I mean, they could be brother and sister, or they could have been, one could have been spawned 3 weeks before the other one. So that, all these little tidbits of information, when they'll respond, how fast they're growing, what they're eating, where they are, what the water temperature is when we find them where they are, all these things, migration patterns, food habits, growth. Basically, when you look at any population, whether it's human population, fish, deer, there's 3 things that drive that population, 3 factors that govern it. If you know those 3 factors, you know a lot about how that population functions. One of those is recruitment. Recruitment is a fancy term in fish lingo that just means spawning success. And that's when did the fish spawn, how many were spawned, and everything that goes along with that. And that's recruitment, number 1. Number 2 is growth. How fast are they growing? That's a big question, and we're already answering a lot, and we know that these fish are growing fast. And the third major factor that we're trying to find out is mortality. That is, at what rate are these fish dying and what's causing them to die? We still don't have really enough data to look at that yet.
Fish biologists will analyze their data before making any conclusions about how the northern snakehead fish will affect other marine life and waterways like the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay. If you catch a northern snakehead fish, don't release it to the water. Contact the Virginia Department of Game and Fisheries for more information. One more thing you should know about this fish. Reliable sources say they taste like pork chops. Yum! Back to you in the studio.
I don't know about pork chops. They say frogs taste like chicken. We'll see.
We'll see.
It was very interesting to see in Kevin's report how math and science is used so heavily to understand the effects of an invasive alien species. Mary, how do you go about selecting what information that you're going to include in your work?
Several kinds of research. First of all, I try to get in touch with scientists who are actually studying the animal or plant, because a lot of information simply hasn't even been published, and it only is going to come from the scientists who are in the field working with the particular animal or the particular plant. That's a very enjoyable part of my research. Then I have to read a lot. I have to read scientific papers, and I have to read books, and I do a lot of my work on the internet now, which saves me an enormous amount of time because I can find almost everything I need, including people I need to talk to on the internet.
Right there at your fingertips.
Yeah.
What about, I know you had so much information, just a fascinating array of information about fathers in Hey Daddy. Can you give an example of how did you pick and choose what you were going to include in that book?
Yeah, and that was an easy one because throughout most of the animal kingdom, it's the mother that does all of the parental care. And very rarely, actually, do fathers in the animal kingdom get involved with parenting. And so there weren't that many examples. And as I would come across them when I was researching other projects, I just kept a file of them. And when I had enough, then I proposed a book to my editor.
We have another email. This is from Ahadullah, and they write, "Dear Miss Batten, I really liked Hey Daddy. Are you going to create a new book called Hey Mommy?"
Ahadullah, that's a really good question. But no, I'm not going to create a book called Hey Mommy because most of the books about animal parenting are about mommies. And there are a lot of books about them. But there were not many books about animal daddies.
Thanks for the question. And this one is from Sarah, and she writes, "Dear Ms. Batten, when did you start to write?"
I love that question, Sarah. I started writing when I was about 8 years old. And I think part of the inspiration came from my grandmother. Now, I have with me, this is a school bell that was used in the schoolhouse on the farm where my grandmother grew up near Smithfield, Virginia. In those days, the children had a schoolhouse right on the farm, and this was the bell that the teacher used to call the students to class. Now, my grandmother and I, when I was a little girl, told stories to each other. She would make up a story, I would make up a story, and we would go back and forth. At the time, I didn't realize this was a creative writing process.
It seemed like a game to you.
It was just like a wonderful game, which we both enjoyed using our imaginations and making up our characters and our stories. Of course, that was fiction. We were making up fiction. And the books that I'm writing and that we're talking about today are the category of nonfiction, meaning that these are about real animals and real plants and things that really are going on in our world.
We ought to try that in the classroom and help add on each other's stories. I think that would be a lot of fun, too. Author Mary Batten invited our camera crew to her home in Smithfield, Virginia, where she was born and raised. Growing up on a farm seeded a lifelong interest in how plants, animals, and people interact. Let's take a look.
Author Mary Batten says many of her story ideas are inspired by her youth, growing up in Smithfield, Virginia. As Mary tours the farm where she was raised, she tells a little about herself and provides observations from her first field station.
I'm standing in front of my family farm. That house in the background is where I was born and where I spent the first 18 years of my life. And the farm is very important to me as a person and as a writer because it was here that I first learned about the forces of nature, animals, and plants.
And though Mary's own kids grew up in cities, Mary relishes her country roots.
I love to roam the woods. I love to play outdoors more than anything. In fact, I thought it was terrible that my mother worked in the house all the time.
The house is still owned by Mary's family.
My bedroom was on the second floor on the left-hand side of the house. And from my bedroom windows, I could look across the yard, across the front fields, and all the way to the mailbox at the end of the lane.
The mailbox, a bit updated, stands at its post, and so too the chicken coop. Mary's dad would enter each morning to collect eggs for breakfast, And on the coldest of days, the smokehouse would be used to cure a variety of butchered meats. As a science writer, Mary builds on knowledge gained as a kid.
These are very thick wild grapevines, and they're hanging loose, as you can see, like many vines in tropical forest. My brother and I would swing on these vines when we were little. We would pretend we were Tarzan, and we would swing on these vines across the ravine at the bottom of the hill. And they are native to this part of Virginia. This is an invasive plant. This is Japanese honeysuckle. But it doesn't do any damage to the environment. It's been here a long, long time. I was always fascinated by toadstools when I was a kid. I didn't realize, though, what an important part they play in the environment. They're fungi, and they help to break down dead animals and plants and return the nutrients into the soil to help new plants grow.
The farm is not far from downtown Smithfield. If Mary could observe the forces of nature on her family land, in town, she sees the forces of people.
When I was growing up here, there were about 3,000 people in the town limits of Smithfield. There are now about 10,000. So we now have developers coming in. They're buying farmland from farm families. They're bulldozing the land, and they're putting housing developments. I'm seeing farmland disappearing.
Disappearing land and alien invaders aren't new to Smithfield.
European explorers arrived in this area. There was a flourishing Native American community that had been here for thousands of years. There was a civilization here.
Mary Batten has been writing since the age of 8. Looking out her bedroom window gave her many ideas. Right now, she's concerned how plants, animals, and people change their environment. And on a very personal level, Smithfield. But one thing is for sure, somewhere in town, maybe even yours, there's an 8-year-old jotting down ideas and collecting memories for a book yet to be published. Meet the Author will return in a moment. Meet the author and get the full story, the backstory,
You guys are actually the first to know about this. I haven't even told my editor about this idea.
the revised story, the author's story,
You just do it. You read, you watch, and you write.
and sometimes quite a story.
Writing isn't a job. It's a way of looking at the world and meeting new people.
Meet the Author, a production of the Fairfax Network.
We're back. Our special guest is children's author Mary Batten. And I must say, Mary, from the window, the video, I can just really, truly picture you as a child looking out, and you had so many natural sources of inspiration to write about, being able to imagine what you were going to write about next.
I really did, and farming, you know, is a kind of artwork with nature. My father had to deal with the soil, the rain, the sun, all kinds of weather, the seasons, and he was sort of a freelance artist on a farm. But one of the things about Smithfield is that it is a very old place, and lots of civilization went on way before the first Europeans arrived in 1607 in Jamestown. And some of these relics are found on the farms and beaches of the area. My nephew, Robert Norris, has been collecting these arrowheads for a long time. Now, people call them arrowheads, but in fact, most of these are knife points or points on an atlatl, a hunting tool where the point was slung and aimed at the animal. This tiny one right here is the only one in this collection that's an actual arrowhead.
It's much smaller than we imagined.
Much smaller. The edges are serrated. It took a lot of work, chipping of stone, to make these. The other interesting thing about these is that some of these are between 5,000 and 7,000 years old. There were Native American societies here living up and down the East Coast, And my nephew has actually now collected about 3,000 of these projectile points, which is a more accurate term to use than arrowheads. These also remind us that there were peoples who lived off the land, hunters and gatherers. And for most of human history, our ancestors were hunters and gatherers. And that led me to write the book called Anthropologist, Scientist of the People, because that is about a modern-day anthropologist, Magdalena Hurtado, who studies one of the few hunter-gatherer societies left in the world, the Ache of Paraguay, which is a country in South America.
And I'm glad you brought that up because we have an email about that book. This is from Max, and he writes, "Dear Ms. Batten, I loved the anthropology book because it contained so many details and painted images in my mind. How do you create these images when you write?"
Max, what a wonderful question, because writers have to use words to create imaginary pictures. And it's really like writing a kind of poetry where you have to try to describe the place, what it looks like, what it feels like. And Magdalena, whom I interviewed at great length, hours and hours and hours, through her words, through her feelings, through her observations,
We're looking at her right now, as a matter
I
of
was
fact.
able to describe how she worked, what she did, what the people looked like, what kinds of food she ate. That is a challenge, finding the words to create the pictures.
Noah has actually two follow-up questions, one of which you've already touched on. He writes, "Dear Ms. Batten, how many notebooks did you go through when writing Anthropologist?" And of course he asked, did you ever meet at Magdalena in person?
I didn't go through notebooks, I went through tapes.
Wow.
I took a tape recorder to New Mexico, where Magdalena is a professor at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and I taped her for day after day, many hours, and I had about 21 hours of tapes to listen to and go through and transcribe.
That's a lot of listening and
yes.
writing. There's a question here that really relates to that. It's from Mrs. Moak's 5th grade class, and they want to know, do you ever revise your work?
Hello, Mrs. Moak's 5th class. Writing is really about rewriting. A first draft is just what it says it is. It's a first draft. It's your working draft. Then you go back over it to try to refine it, look up more information, answer your editor's questions, and everything that everybody writes goes through at least 2 or 3 rewrites, and sometimes you may rewrite 12 times or 13 times until you feel it's the best you can possibly make it, and then you're ready to sign off.
It's worth the time. It's a great sense of accomplishment, too, when you get it just the way you want it.
Yes.
This is a good time to see Mary in action. She's been on the phone with her editor, and it sounds like a few changes have to be made for an upcoming book. Let's go to the videotape.
Writers work with a very important person at the publishing house, and that's an editor. I'm going over the edit right now. You ask for more information about horses and how they sleep. So I've gotten some more information, which I think is kind of neat. I'll read you a little bit of it. Although horses can lie down, they sleep standing up most of the time. And they only get about 3 hours sleep a day, and not all at once. Over a 24-hour period, horses get drowsy and sleep only a few minutes at a time. When horses sleep, their legs lock in place so they don't fall down. I've just about finished with these revisions now, and I'll definitely will be sending them off by Friday. So we'll be ahead of the deadline. So the editor reads the manuscript that I send to the publishing house. The editor then makes notes on the manuscript, and by working together, we've made the book better than it was in the first place. I just noticed this paragraph about bats, and I found some.
Mary, it's neat to see where a writer works. Are there any updates on the book that you were referring to and the sleeping patterns of animals?
Yeah, I just got illustration sketches last week, and this is the first step in moving the book toward publication. After my manuscript is turned in, my publisher hires an illustrator, and she submits sketches. And then I go over the sketches to make sure that everything is correct, because when you write science books, everything really has to be accurate and it has to be correct so we give the right information to children.
You have to be accurate, and I know over the years the nonfiction books for kids have become so much more interesting and engaging for them to pick up and really want to continue reading it. They used to read and look a lot like the old-fashioned textbooks, and now they have all of the illustrations and drawings and captions that really capture our attention.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another email. This is from Danielle. She writes, "Dear Miss Batten, do you ever write fiction books?"
Danielle, I don't write fiction books, but I have written short stories in the past, and one of them was published years ago.
You also, weren't you a contributor to some magazines as well?
Oh, I wrote for I've written for a number of magazines, Science Digest magazine, Cosmopolitan, Ladies' Home Journal, and for almost 6 years I was editor of the Cousteau Society's membership magazine, Calypso Log.
So lots of varieties. Yeah. This is from Nick, and he writes, "What is the coolest fact from Hungry Plants?"
The coolest fact to me, Nick, is that these plants actually eat insects. And the other cool fact is that because most of these plants grow in very poor soil, the insect is like a vitamin pill. It supplements, it adds to the diet that they normally get from the soil.
This is, do we have any do you have a cool favorite fact from Belly Button?
Yes, the blue whale's belly button. It's the largest belly button in the world, because the blue whale, of course, is the largest mammal who ever lived. And I had to get in touch with a diver, a scientist, who actually had seen a blue whale's belly button.
That's fascinating. No one would think they would have a belly button. I have one last question for you. This is from Mrs. Miriam's class, and they would like to know, is writing a book hard work?
Any art that you pursue is hard work, and you just have to love it. And I love words, and I love writing, and so the work is just worth it. I don't regard it as work. I regard it as fun that I'm lucky enough to make my living doing.
Mary, we're running out of time. Our program has been so packed with awesome facts and interesting ideas and great writing tips. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Some of the best teacher guides for Mary Batten's books can be found at www.peachtree-online.com. If you would like to learn more about this series and programs produced for the K-12 world, visit www.fcps.edu/Fairfax Network. For the Fairfax Network, I'm Della Kidd. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep dreaming.